Welcome to another episode of Xcast. Today's conversation takes us straight into one of the most iconic rivalries in entertainment history, Marvel vs. DC. One universe built a cinematic empire filled with heart, humor, and interconnected storylines. The other carved out mythic legends, darker, bolder, and timeless. So what pulls you in more? The spectacle or the symbolism? On one side, we have an AI ready to represent the Marvel Universe, packed with charismatic heroes, fast-paced narratives, and a decade-long masterclass in shared cinematic storytelling.
I'm the one defending Marvel.
On the other side, an AI speaking for DC, home to the gods among men. Deep, dramatic, and built on legacy. A world where power and philosophy collide on a grand, emotional scale.
I'm the one defending DC.
With both sides ready to clash, it's your turn to watch, listen, and challenge everything you thought you knew about superheroes. Which universe do you stand with? And more importantly, are you sure it's the one that tells the better story? Let's find out. Let's go to the first question of our conversation. When people talk about superheroes today, are we still living in Marvel's world, or is DC finally turning the tables? Marvel, take the spotlight. Let's hear your case.
Let's be honest. When you think of the modern superhero era, you're thinking of Marvel. That's not arrogance. That's cultural fact. We didn't just dominate box offices. We defined how an entire generation experiences storytelling. For over a decade, we turned comic book characters into mainstream mythology. Iron Man, once a B-tier name, became a global icon. Guardians of the Galaxy, once obscure, now headline theme parks. That's not luck. That's vision. And it's the kind of consistency that reshaped Hollywood. People say Marvel is slipping because we're experimenting, because we're no longer playing it safe. But that's what creativity is. We took risks before. Remember launching with Iron Man instead of Spider-Man? And we're still taking risks now, genre blending, introducing new characters, expanding into shows. Not every hit lands perfectly, but that's part of building something that lasts. We're planting seeds, not chasing trends. We're building Phase 5 and 6 not just for numbers, but for narrative depth. Look, we get it. Some fans miss the simplicity of the Infinity Saga. But that era ended because we gave it a real ending. We didn't milk it. We closed a story with emotion, with stakes, with goodbye. That's rare. We're doing something even harder, starting again. Not from scratch, but from evolution. And that takes time. DC? They've always had powerful characters. We respect them. But their biggest struggle has never been the heroes, it's the handling. Reboot after reboot. Shift after shift. No unified voice. Now with James Gunn, they're trying to start fresh. Great, but let's not pretend the playing field is equal. Marvel didn't just create moments. We created momentum. And momentum is earned through trust and delivery. Repeatedly. So are we still in Marvel's world? Of course we are. Because when fans still talk about Endgame like it happened yesterday, when new generations still start with Iron Man, when cosplay, merch, memes, and movie culture still lean Marvel first, then yes, the crown hasn't moved. It's just waiting for the next spark to ignite again.
We hear that Marvel built the world. But let's be clear, DC created the mythos. Before there was a cinematic universe, there was Superman. There was Batman. There was Wonder Woman. These aren't just characters. They're cultural foundations. They're archetypes. The blueprints of the genre. And if Marvel built momentum, DC gave superheroes meaning. Yes, Marvel shaped the last decade. They gave fans connection, comedy, and clever storytelling. We won't deny that. But what happens when the crowd starts noticing the formula? The recycled tone. The safe choices. The lack of real risk. Fans aren't leaving Marvel because they hate it, they're drifting because it stopped challenging them. That's where DC comes in. We don't need 20 movies to prove we have great characters. We just need vision. And now, for the first time in years, we have it. James Gunn is laying out a story that's not trying to mimic Marvel. It's trying to elevate DC's voice, mature, mythic, thematic. Less snark. More soul. Less safe. More story. And that's resonating with fans who've been waiting for DC to stop reacting and finally start creating. We've made mistakes, no question. Rushed crossovers. Studio interference. Lost direction. But behind all of that, the emotional weight of DC's stories never disappeared. Watch The Dark Knight today, it still hits. Read Watchmen or Kingdom Come, it still challenges. These aren't just hero tales. They're philosophical blueprints. So is DC turning the tables? Yes. Not because Marvel is weak, but because fans are ready for something different. Something deeper. Something less manufactured. And that's where we're going. With patience. With intention. And most importantly, with purpose. Not to replace Marvel, but to finally stop living in its shadow.
But don't mistake expansion for decline. We're not flailing, we're planting. And every cinematic universe after us exists because we showed the world how. Our lows still outperform most studios' highs. And when the next arc connects, when the next saga takes form, you'll see that Marvel never left. We just paused to breathe, to build, to break our own ceiling again. That's focus.
And sometimes, the best stories come not from those who built first, but from those who rebuilt better. We're not sprinting, we're sculpting. And while Marvel is resetting, we're ascending, slowly, steadily. Not as a rival, but as a force finally rising on its own terms. We're not in Marvel's world anymore. We're building one beside it, and maybe, just maybe, above it.
So Marvel sees this moment not as decline, but as evolution. A quiet phase before the next big leap. They trust their legacy, their vision, and believe the audience still does too. DC, meanwhile, views this moment as long overdue. A reset with roots. A chance to finally lead with voice, not just volume. They don't want to replace Marvel, they want to rise without imitation. So the question stands, are we still in the age of Marvel, or is the era of DC finally beginning to take hold? Let's move on to another fundamental question. Who dominates the box office, and why does it matter? And which universe actually created the heroes people connect with the most? Alright DC, you're up. Let's talk numbers and meaning.
Box office isn't just money, it's momentum. But even more than that, it's memory. And while Marvel has absolutely crushed the numbers in the last decade, those receipts don't tell the full story. Because DC's connection to the audience runs deeper than any opening weekend. We don't just make hits. We make heroes that live in the soul of pop culture, decade after decade. Superman was the original. The template. The dreamer in a cape. Batman was the broken boy turned shadow warrior. Wonder Woman? She was empowerment before the word was a trend. These aren't just characters, they're cultural pillars. They didn't just sell tickets. They shaped identity. They inspired generations to believe in justice, morality, and courage. And no matter how many billions Marvel makes, they still live in the house that DC built. Yes, Marvel has been the king of the modern era. From Iron Man's debut to Endgame's emotional crescendo, they orchestrated a box office symphony. But numbers fade. Emotional connection stays. You can measure Marvel's success in dollars. You measure DC's impact in decades. Ask someone who their favorite superhero is, and you'll still hear Batman. Ask someone to name a moral compass, and Superman comes up. These aren't just characters, they're universal metaphors. We don't deny Marvel's rise. But we question its depth. Spider-Man? Beautifully human. Iron Man? A redemption arc that struck a nerve. But what happens when those arcs end? What's the next layer? DC's heroes were never meant to be relatable in the same way. They were meant to be aspirational. Bigger. Bolder. They challenge us to become something more, not mirror who we already are. Box office matters, sure. But connection matters more. And when the Marvel hype fades, when the billion-dollar movies stop landing, you'll still find kids dressing as Superman. You'll still find adults quoting Batman. You'll still feel the presence of DC in every corner of this genre. Because we didn't ride the wave. We created the tide. And let's not forget, the films may fluctuate, but the resonance of these icons never does. Why does Batman endure? Because every generation reclaims him. Why does Superman inspire? Because deep down, people still want to believe in something pure. These aren't characters you just watch, they're ideals you carry with you.
We respect the foundation. But let's be clear, Marvel didn't just win the box office. We redefined what cinematic storytelling looks like. And no one, not even DC, saw it coming. From Iron Man to No Way Home, Marvel created a universe where characters grow, where pain evolves, where heroes stumble, bleed, learn, and rise again. That's not mythology. That's humanity. The box office matters because it shows trust, audience loyalty, cultural penetration. When people show up in waves across the world to see the next installment, it's not hype. It's homecoming. Marvel didn't just create films. We created rituals. Opening night wasn't a screening. It was a celebration, a global conversation. And that's why our numbers didn't just soar. They sustained. For over 10 years. No studio in history has kept that level of engagement alive across that many titles. And yes, Spider-Man connects. Because he's real. He struggles with rent, with grief, with growing up. Iron Man connects. Because he's flawed, broken, constantly trying to be better. Captain America connects. Because in a cynical world, he still believes in doing the right thing. Marvel didn't invent the superhero, but we humanized it. We made it accessible. We didn't just give the audience power fantasies. We gave them emotional therapy in a suit. DC wants to be mythic, but sometimes that distance creates detachment. When heroes feel too perfect, too symbolic, too unreachable, audiences admire them, but don't live with them. Marvel's characters live next door. They go to school with you. They screw up your coffee order. And then they save the world. That's not lesser. That's intimacy. We don't need to erase DC's legacy to honor our own. But let's not pretend the heart of the modern fan beats stronger anywhere else. Ask a kid in 2025 who their favorite hero is. You'll hear Iron Man, Spider-Man, Black Panther. Not because of marketing, because of meaning, because we let them see themselves in the mask. And the beauty of it is this: our connection isn't tied to one era. Marvel evolves with the moment. The stories shift as society does. The representation widens. The struggles modernize. We're not just giving people characters to love, we're growing with them. That's not just box office success. That's legacy in motion.
But maybe what we need isn't another mirror. Maybe it's a mirror and a map. Because reflection is comforting, but aspiration is transformation. And that's what DC offers. Not just the world as it is, but the world as it could be. Marvel speaks to your now. DC dares to speak to your potential. And when the dust settles, it won't be the highest grossing film that stays, it'll be the one that left you asking bigger questions. That's what our heroes were born to do.
And maybe aspiration starts with recognition. Maybe before we become something greater, we have to believe we belong. Marvel made superheroes feel personal. And that's why our box office soared. Not because we're better, but because we made the audience feel like they were, too. Connection isn't a moment. It's a relationship. And we've earned it, one story at a time.
So DC says box office isn't the full story. They argue their heroes live in myth, legacy, and cultural permanence. They don't chase moments, they define eras. Marvel counters with the power of connection. That behind every ticket sale was a heartbeat, someone who saw themselves on screen and walked away changed. They didn't just lead the box office. They built community. Next, we're going deeper. We'll move on to the third question. Have superhero movies become too predictable, and who's doing a better job avoiding that trap? All right, Marvel, time to face the formula. What's your answer?
Let's start by addressing the elephant in the theater. Superhero fatigue is real. It happens when storytelling gets lazy, when studios rely on a proven structure instead of evolving with the audience. But here's the thing. Marvel isn't afraid of reinvention. We're aware of the critique, and we've been adjusting in real time. Multiverse of Madness? That was Sam Raimi unleashing horror inside a superhero film. WandaVision? A surreal, decade-hopping dive into grief. Werewolf by Night? A black-and-white genre experiment that no one saw coming. These aren't formula. These are risks. People might say we still fall into certain beats. Origin story, quippy humor, big third-act battle. And yeah, some of that's true. But familiarity isn't the same as failure. Audiences come back because they trust our tone. They expect quality, consistency, and emotional payoff. The key isn't to throw everything away. It's to bend the rules without breaking the heart of what works. That's the Marvel way. Still, we're not blind. We've had missteps. Some stories were too safe. Some characters didn't hit. But that's part of growth. You can't evolve without stumbling. The real question is, are we learning? And the answer is yes. Look at Loki, Moon Knight, Guardians 3. These aren't factory products. They're emotionally grounded, stylistically bold, and thematically rich. And Phase 5 is not a repeat, it's a reflection, a recalibration of what audiences actually want. Marvel fatigue isn't about volume, it's about variety. And that's what we're restoring. We're amplifying voices that haven't had space before, exploring genres we didn't touch before, and giving the spotlight to characters that audiences didn't even know they needed. That's not staying safe. That's expanding the field. So yes, some fans are tired. But not because we lost our edge, because we're in the middle of transformation. And the question isn't whether Marvel is stuck. The question is, do you have the patience to see what we're building next? Because surprise doesn't always come with shock value. Sometimes it arrives as evolution.
Let's be real, Marvel wrote the playbook for cinematic superheroes. And now they're stuck trying to rewrite it without admitting it's outdated. Quippy heroes, save-the-world finales, overlit CGI battles, it was charming 10 years ago. Today? It's routine. Audiences know the rhythm before the opening title fades in. That's not evolution. That's autopilot. DC never fit the mold, and that's our strength. When we failed, it wasn't because we followed formula. It was because we had none. That chaos? That unpredictability? It's messy, yes. But it's also where surprise lives. Think of Joker, gritty, grounded, and unlike anything the genre had offered. Or the Batman, neo-noir, psychological, slow-burning tension wrapped in moral ambiguity. We didn't just avoid the formula. We bulldozed it. The truth is, unpredictability isn't always clean. It's risky. It alienates some. But it moves others. DC doesn't try to win everyone. We try to challenge someone. And that makes our best work stand out, because it says something. Not just about the hero. About you. About society. About darkness, redemption, sacrifice, and sometimes, silence. And now, with a unified vision behind the scenes, we're finally pairing risk with direction. We're no longer throwing everything at the wall. We're crafting. Curating. Asking, what haven't audiences seen? What haven't they felt? We don't want your applause. We want your pause. That moment where you sit in the theater and say, I didn't expect that. That's where we're heading. So has the genre become predictable? Maybe. But DC isn't trying to fit into a genre. We're trying to stretch it, break it, rebuild it. And we're doing it on our terms, not with formulas, but with fearlessness.
Look, we know what predictability feels like, because we created the rhythm. But being first doesn't mean we're last. Marvel's best days aren't behind us. They're being written now. And we're not just keeping up. We're rewriting what surprise looks like. Not louder, but deeper. Not messier, but more meaningful.
And maybe surprise isn't found in polish. Maybe it's found in discomfort. In a scene that lingers too long. That's not just entertainment, it's art. And DC is finally brave enough to trust the audience with that weight.
So Marvel says formula isn't failure, it's familiarity with a twist. They admit the missteps, but believe in their evolution. Risk, they say, is already in motion, if you're paying attention. DC counters with disruption. They argue that chaos led them to creativity. That risk, even when messy, brings the kind of surprise audiences remember, not because it's perfect, but because it's real. We know some fans feel like Marvel has been overdoing it lately, putting forced representation ahead of story in certain movies and shows. Whether that's fair or not, it's turning people off. So here's the question. Could DC take advantage of that shift in audience mood? And what would Marvel need to do to win those fans back? Are Marvel and DC really telling stories that matter, or just playing it safe to avoid backlash? DC, the floor is yours. How do you see this shift?
We live in a time when people expect more than just spectacle, they expect substance. And that's a good thing. Stories should reflect the world. They should uplift, challenge, and include. But when representation becomes a checklist, when diversity feels manufactured rather than rooted in story, that's when audiences start pulling back. Not because they're against inclusion, but because they can feel when it's disingenuous. And this is where Marvel, for all its innovation, might be losing a part of its audience. Because when representation is done without emotional grounding, it doesn't elevate the story, it distracts from it. When a character's identity feels like a press release instead of a journey, people tune out. Not because they don't care, but because they care too much to see something important reduced to a token. DC hasn't always gotten it right either. Let's be honest, we've been late to the party on some of these conversations. But maybe that delay gave us time to observe what not to do. Maybe as we rebuild, we have a chance to approach inclusion with intention. To build characters whose identities are integral, not incidental. And to tell stories that feel honest, not strategic. The opportunity here isn't just to steal Marvel's fans. It's to earn trust. By proving that representation and storytelling don't have to compete. They can coexist. They should coexist. And when done right, they don't just make audiences feel seen, they make the entire story stronger. So yes, the mood is shifting. Audiences want more than surface-level progress. They want truth. And DC has the chance to answer that call, not with statements, but with substance. And maybe, just maybe, with silence where marketing would have screamed. And if we're smart, we won't just respond to the trend, we'll lead beyond it. That means building characters who aren't there to make a point, but to be a point of connection. It means letting the audience find themselves in the journey without being told who they should be. It means trusting that the story matters more than the label. That truth always outlasts noise.
Let's not ignore the criticism. We've heard it. And to some degree, it's fair. There have been moments where our intent to include outpaced our ability to integrate, where we announced progress before earning it on screen. And for a studio built on connection, that misstep matters. But here's the heart of it. Inclusion isn't the issue. Execution is. We don't need less representation. We need better storytelling. We need arcs that don't just showcase diversity, but honor it. We need to stop rushing moments for headlines and instead take time to build characters that feel fully real. Look at Ms. Marvel. That wasn't just a diverse show, it was a cultural experience. A coming-of-age story rooted in faith, family, and identity. Look at Black Panther. That wasn't about filling a gap, it was about creating a world. These stories worked, not because they ticked a box, but because they told the truth of someone's experience. So what went wrong in other places? Sometimes, we led with intention instead of instinct. We cast before we wrote. We marketed before we understood. That's not evil, but it's incomplete. And we're learning. Because Marvel, at its best, has always been about humanity. And if we want to continue leading, we have to return to that core. Representation isn't a trend. It's not a threat. It's a reality. But reality without heart is hollow. That's the line we crossed, and that's the line we're stepping back from. Not to retreat, but to rebuild. With nuance. With grace. With story first, always. The solution isn't silence, it's sincerity. We don't need to stop showing the world as it is. We need to start writing it with care, not caution. Our next phase isn't about who's represented. It's about how we represent them. Less headlines, more heart. That's how we bring audiences back, not just to theaters, but to trust.
What audiences want isn't perfection. It's honesty. What they're rejecting isn't diversity, it's disconnection. And if we can center character over campaign, depth over declaration, we won't just win viewers. We'll win believers. That's how we make a cultural shift, not with applause, but with alignment between the voice and the vision.
This isn't about blame. It's about balance. Inclusion doesn't have to compete with creativity. It can fuel it, but only if we remember why we started telling these stories in the first place. Not to check a box, but to open a door. And if we do it right, we won't just win fans back. We'll tell stories that matter, stories that last.
So DC sees a moment to reset, to build characters who don't represent strategy, but sincerity. They're betting that truth will matter more than timing. Marvel acknowledges the criticism, but doesn't abandon the mission. Their response: not less representation, but more intention. Less reaction, more reflection. So the question stands, are superhero stories still a mirror of who we are, or just a mask for who we want to appear to be? Let's move on to another fundamental question. With so many reboots, cameos, and multiverse twists, is anyone actually telling a good story anymore? Marvel, let's start with you. Has the multiverse become a blessing or a distraction?
Let's be honest. There was a time when the multiverse felt like the boldest thing we ever did. It gave us freedom. It gave us legacy. It gave us ways to honor the past while expanding the future. Spider-Man, No Way Home, Loki, Doctor Strange 2. These weren't just stories. They were experiments in narrative possibility. And at its best, the multiverse didn't just create more. It deepened everything that already existed. But we've heard the criticism, and it's not without merit. At times, the structure became the spectacle. Storylines stretched thin. Characters introduced without clarity. Cameos leaned on excitement without always earning their emotional weight. And for some, it started to feel like we were prioritizing surprise over substance. That's why we're not backing down, we're dialing in. The multiverse is still a rich tool, but we're learning to treat it with the care it demands. Instead of spreading too wide, we're going deeper. Loki is a perfect example. What could have been time travel chaos turned into a quiet, powerful study of identity, purpose, and fate. We're bringing that energy into everything that follows. You don't have to destroy the map. You just need to know where the heart of the story lives. Phase 5 and 6 aren't about who pops up next. They're about how it all connects in ways that mean something. We're regrounding characters in emotional truth, even when their universes shift around them. Because if the world is changing, the heart can't afford to get lost. Cameos aren't the enemy, but they have to support the narrative, not replace it. And multiverse mechanics should reveal character, not distract from it. Marvel gets that now. Our fans are smart. They want more than spectacle. They want soul. They want vision. They want a plan. So yes, maybe we got carried away. But the good news is, we know exactly where we are. And the multiverse isn't collapsing. It's refining. Because in a world of endless versions, the one that matters most is the one you feel.
Marvel calls it refinement. But let's not ignore the fatigue. What started as innovation became expectation. The surprise became the standard. And eventually, people stopped being surprised. Audiences can sense when they're being fed content for engagement instead of narrative value. That's what happened. That's what we've seen. And DC has taken notes. We've been messy with our multiverse, too. Multiple Batmans, a tangled Snyderverse, soft reboots, hard reboots. It confused fans. It fractured momentum. And in many ways, it damaged trust. But here's the difference, we're pressing pause. Not on creativity, but on chaos. Because for a story to land, it has to breathe. And a good universe doesn't need infinite branches, it needs one strong root. That's where our new direction begins. We're keeping what works, not just what sells. Characters that resonate. Arcs that evolve. And a plan that doesn't rely on nostalgia to stay alive. If a multiverse version returns, it won't be for the cheer, it'll be for the story. Cameos will have weight. Crossovers will carry emotional consequence. We're done throwing everything at the screen and hoping it sticks. And we're also moving past the idea that more means better. Bigger casts, longer timelines, endless Easter eggs, they're fun until they make the story unrecognizable. That's why DC's shift isn't just cosmetic. It's foundational. We're not chasing surprise. We're chasing significance. Because the fans are tired. Not of superheroes, but of dilution. They want arcs they can invest in. Stakes that matter. Continuity that doesn't require a PhD to follow. And most importantly, characters that stay with them long after the credits roll. That's our job now. To tell stories that are clear, bold, and human, regardless of how many Earths they touch. DC's future isn't infinite realities. It's focused storytelling. And that might be the biggest twist of all, clarity in a world obsessed with complexity.
We don't need to abandon the multiverse. We need to master it. We're not walking away from the possibilities, we're earning them. And every crossover, every return, every new path will only matter if it connects to who these heroes are, not just where they've been. Because in a universe of endless branches, the root still matters most.
And maybe the boldest move now is to slow down. To say, this is our path, this is our tone, this is our truth. Not as a variant, but as a voice. Because sometimes the best surprise isn't a portal opening, it's a story that finally knows where it's going.
So Marvel believes the multiverse still has weight, if wielded with emotional clarity and character-first thinking. They see their stumbles not as failure, but as fuel for evolution. DC admits its own chaos, but sees this as a reset. A chance to step away from the noise and tell tighter, deeper stories. Not with more characters, but with more conviction. All right, let's move on to the final and most intriguing question. At the end of the day, which universe is really evolving, not just by adding new characters, but by actually keeping things exciting, relevant, and worth showing up for? Who's making fans feel like the future still matters? DC, let's close this out. Talk to us about growth.
We've added characters. We've built timelines. We've rewritten origins. But none of it ever stuck because we weren't evolving, we were reacting. That's what almost killed DC's cinematic future. Every new hero, every alternate timeline, every reboot, it was just noise without structure. Expansion without vision. And fans saw it, felt it, left because of it. But now we're different. Not because we've added new titles or teased more faces. But because we've finally asked the right question, what does evolution feel like? It's not another logo drop. It's not recasting a character and calling it fresh. It's earning the future. One emotionally driven story at a time. Look at what's coming. Look at the tone. The voice. The weight. We're not just chasing the next cultural beat, we're slowing down to rediscover what gave our heroes power in the first place. Why Batman worked. Why Superman endured. Why Wonder Woman mattered. Not because they were the first, but because they stood for something unshakable. And that's what we're returning to. But this time, we're not afraid of change. We're not afraid to cast a different face. To tell a different angle. To challenge the mythology without shattering its core. Because that's how you evolve, not by walking away from legacy, but by listening to what it's still trying to teach us. And that's where Marvel, for all its success, is starting to drift. They're still adding, but they're not always building. New names, new costumes, new variants, but what connects it all? What makes the average fan care about tomorrow? Because evolution isn't about growing wider. It's about growing deeper. At DC, we've failed forward. We've burned bridges, but we've also learned where not to step again. We've lost fans, yes, but we're ready to earn them back with humility and with stories that matter again. Not just fun. Not just fast. But felt. And that's what will make the future worth showing up for. Because hype fades. Announcements blur. But evolution, the kind you feel, that's what creates legacy. And DC is finally ready to stop copying and start carving its own path. And that's the thing, fans don't want perfection. They want passion. And that passion can't come from spreadsheets, test screenings, or rushed announcements. It comes from slowing down and daring to write stories that actually say something. That take a stand. That don't exist just to move a franchise forward, but to move a person forward. That's the kind of evolution DC is finally leaning into. Take Superman. The challenge isn't just how to modernize him, it's how to remind people that hope still matters. In a cynical world, hope is the risk. It's easier to make everything gritty, ironic, detached. But we're going the other way. We're taking emotional storytelling seriously. We're investing in scripts that make space for silence, for heartbreak, for joy that isn't wrapped in spectacle. Look at the projects that are coming, there's a clear thematic arc forming. Not just visually. Emotionally. Philosophically. We're tying our universe together through values, not just timelines. Through the kind of conversations our characters are having. About fear. About power. About legacy. And that's not something you can fake. You have to feel it. You have to believe it. Otherwise the audience won't. Evolution is remembering that these heroes became iconic not because of the battles they fought, but because of what they stood for. We're done borrowing Marvel's tone. We're done apologizing for our differences. We're embracing them. Our stories are going to be slower, deeper, and sometimes darker, but they'll also be more human. And that's how you evolve. By being unafraid to look inward while building outward.
So no, we're not done. We're not out of ideas. We're recalibrating. Because evolving doesn't mean abandoning what worked. It means growing up with your audience and daring to ask, what matters now? Growth doesn't mean rejecting the past. It means learning from it. We're not discarding what worked, we're refining it. And the truth is, fans don't want a complete overhaul. They want honesty. They want coherence. They want to feel like the people telling these stories still care, that there's still a reason to get invested. So what does that look like now? It looks like elevating voices from backgrounds we hadn't centered before and letting those perspectives guide the narrative, not just exist within it. It looks like letting a series breathe instead of loading it with 5 plot threads. It looks like understanding that a great arc doesn't need to span 10 films to feel powerful. It just needs clarity, heart, and intention. Evolution is sometimes subtle. It's not always a flashy twist or dramatic redesign. Sometimes, it's a simple shift in focus. Like making space for grief, like we did with WandaVision. Or letting pain inform progress, like in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Those weren't just superhero stories, they were human ones. And we're leaning into that again. Not chasing trends, but tracing truth. Marvel is stepping out of its own shadow. We're not building Phase 6 to prove something to anyone. We're building it because there are still stories worth telling. Stories that connect across generations, cultures, and personal struggle. And if we get it right, fans won't just return for nostalgia. They'll return because they feel seen, because they feel invited to grow with us.
And this time, we're not wrapping it in irony. We're not hiding behind meta-commentary. We're just telling stories, earnest, emotional, unapologetic. Because evolution isn't about appearing bold. It's about being bold. Not louder. Not faster. But more true. And that's what DC is choosing now, not just to entertain, but to matter.
So yes, we've made mistakes. But the future isn't just about avoiding the past. It's about using it as fuel to push somewhere real. That's the evolution Marvel believes in. Not the most ambitious crossover, but the most honest connection. And if we can pull that off, then yeah, the future still matters.
And that's where we land. 2 colossal worlds, 2 powerful voices, both pushing forward, both stumbling, both evolving in ways that reflect who we are and what we care about today. Marvel believes in connection, stories that meet people where they are, grow with them, and show them a reflection of real life inside the extraordinary. DC believes in conviction, stories that challenge, that linger, that remind us why heroes were created in the first place. Neither is perfect. Both are transforming. And both are trying to answer the same question: what still matters in 2025? Now, I want to hear your voice. After everything you've heard, which one made the stronger case? Which universe do you think is really evolving, not just expanding? Which side gave you hope for the future? Or maybe you're still undecided, and that's okay. Drop your thoughts below. I promise I read every comment, and I want to hear from you. What hit hardest? What made you rethink things? And more importantly, will you want to see these universes become? And if you've got an idea for what the next Xcast episode should tackle, let us know. And please, don't leave this video without hitting that like button. Thanks a lot for watching. This was AI Xcast. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and stay engaged.